Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our joint webcast with the Edinburgh, Lothians and Fife District Centre. Today we are joined by Chris Wardrope, who is here to talk to us about becoming a chartered banker and what impact this has had on his career. He will also be sharing the story of how Handelsbanken has evolved over the times. I hope you all enjoyed today's webcast, and I'll firstly pass you over to Helen Mackay.
Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to our event this evening. When I was thinking about this, the spring evenings were coming, but it's actually blowing a bit of a hoolie outside. It's really windy and quite miserable, so probably quite a nice evening to be sitting in and being entertained by Chris tonight. The local district centres just finished their AGM, so it might be quite nice to just share that this is the medal that the chairperson gets to wear at events. It comes out about once a year, but I'm very honoured to be and privileged to be able to share this with you tonight. I'm delighted to introduce Chris Wardrope to you tonight as our key speaker. He started his career with a traditional Scottish bank, and some would say that he's continued with a traditional bank, with Handelsbanken. And when Chris and I had a little chat about tonight's event, I was totally unaware that Handelsbanken were about to open their third branch in Edinburgh, which is quite some achievement. He's also happy to share his story of what it's meant to him in terms of developing his career by being a chartered banker, which is something that's very close to my own heart, because I feel that being qualified is quite key and demonstrating your commitment to your career. Rory McIntyre is also joining us this evening to do our question and answer session at the end. So please keep him busy by submitting your questions in the normal through the normal channels. And just before I pass you over to Chris, I'm just going to do a little plug for anyone that's based in Edinburgh, Lothians and Fife district area, that we're having our annual interprofessional quiz next Wednesday night. And it's open to all accountants, solicitors, bankers, sort of professionals, to submit a team. And if it's something that you're interested in finding out a bit more about or want to submit a team, then if you just drop your details into the chat, then Michael Coburn, who's one of our key collaborators on the interprofessional quiz, will get in touch and provide you with more information. So without any further ado, I'll pass you over to Chris.
Thanks, Helen. And first of all, it's a real privilege to be asked to do this, especially given the fact now that I'm based down in England. I've been away from Scotland now for some 6 years or so. So when myself and Helen started to talk about doing the presentation, it was something which was close to my heart, and I hope you enjoy it. The presentation tonight, first of all, will take 3 parts. I'll do a small introduction on myself and being a chartered banker, what that meant to my career, and also thereafter go into the history of Handelsbanken. One of the things which I'm aware of is that even though we are about to open our third branch in Edinburgh East, not many people are aware of who Handelsbanken actually are. So what I'll do is give a small plotted history, then a little bit of how Handelsbanken life is in 2021. And thereafter, I believe there may be some time for questions. So who am I, first of all? Well, as Helen said, my name is Chris Wardrope. Started off my banking career many years ago now, 28 years ago, and I started off for the Clydesdale Bank in Bo'ness. I started straight from school, and I suppose that's really where my chartered banker story starts. As I prepared for tonight, I was wondering, why did I join banking? Why did I want to go into banking in the first instance? And it was a kind of story which I've always often thought about. When I was about 10, 12, I remember going into the TSB with my mother, and we come from a town called Grangemouth, which, as many of you know, very much a council town, working class town. And we went into the TSB, and the respect which the people behind the bank counter got from the customers was something quite phenomenal. And I remember saying to my mum that day, I'm going to join a bank when I'm older, and that's all I focused on. So even though I wasn't very good at school, I always had this dream that one day I'd become a banker. And I had this mythical figure in my head as well, that one day I'd earn £26,000. Don't know where that came from, but that was my dreams when I was younger. And it all came from when someone said to a guy, as I say, behind the counter, "Hello, Donald." And I remember the name. So what happened to me, I was pretty average at school. I'll not lie. I think people mature at different ages, different age ranges. And for me, school was something where, yeah, you got through it. You didn't really do that much other than play football. Yeah, I wasn't the most intelligent. I suffered badly from dyslexia. So I was very, very much, I could adapt, I could read, I could study, but people learn at different paces. So for me, when I left school at 16, I left at the first opportunity, and I decided to write to the banks to kind of try and fulfill this dream that I always had. So I did that, and the only bank, believe it or not, that responded back to a school leaver at 16 was Clydesdale Bank. So I went for an interview with Clydesdale Bank and got the job, thankfully. And years later, I would actually work with the guy who interviewed me, which was quite funny. But I ended up joining Clydesdale Bank in 1992 in Bowness branch. I really enjoyed my first few years in the bank. It was quite daunting. It was daunting working with numbers and figures, especially with my dyslexia. It really gave me a complex when I was younger as to how would people perceive me? Would they perceive me as foolish? Would they perceive me as being silly? Sometimes it maybe took 2 or 3 times to show me something before I would actually realise what they were actually saying to me. And for those of you with dyslexia, if there's anybody there who has dyslexia, you'll know a lot of the information you do store is in your head because you can't read your own handwriting, which is a big thing which I still suffer with. So after my first couple of years in the bank, I obviously started to show some promise. And I kept hearing about, are you going to do your bank exams? Are you going to do your bank exams? And I was really daunted by it. I think the prospect of studying again for someone who was pretty much average at school was not something which I really favoured. It wasn't a path I wanted to go down. But I met a woman who later became my branch manager at the time in Clydesdale Bank, a woman called Jackie Heats, who actually had our members. And I remember thinking at the time, God, having that members on our bank card looks so impressive. I really need to get that. And that was really what drove me to actually learn about what the Chartered Institute bankers were, who they were. Even though I'd been in banking for a couple of years by then, I still wasn't clear of it. There had been a couple of people that I'd worked with who'd started their exams and then they hadn't finished them. And that made me really daunting. It made it a really daunting prospect for me because I just didn't know how I would fare with them. So after speaking to Jackie for a while, she encouraged me to get some more information. And we realised that even though I'd left school at 16, I would actually be able to qualify to sit my associates if I actually took what was known at the time a Diploma in Financial Services course. Rather than sitting 6 subjects, I'll be able to sit 4, and then I could be fast-tracked on to the ACIBS course. And that's what I did. So that was probably back in around about 1994. And we got myself enrolled on that course. And then I started to work my way towards qualifying to do the ACIBS. Now, what was great at the time was Clydesdale Bank as a young banker really supported me during that. I think that Jackie had obviously championed me for that, and the bank had agreed, as they did for all their staff at the time, to give us an interest-free loan, telling us to do our subjects. And again, the fear of that, not having much money, being a young guy from a kind of council estate, I suppose, for want of a better word, we weren't rich. The fear of having that debt over me if I failed really put the fear of God into me. So for the first time in my life, I actually studied. And it made me become a different person. As I say, everybody grows older and matures at different times. But for me, when I started to study from a chartered industry bankers, it changed my perception of myself. It changed what was important to me. I began to study. My career became more important rather than just going out as a young lad. I had to teach myself almost in essence to read again, to study, to absorb information once again, because I'd pretty much forgot that when I left school. And I think for me, doing this, as I say, changed my life. And I think it's only when I sit back and think about those moments that I kind of feel quite proud that I did that, because, as I say, not being great at school, the easiest thing would have been not to do it. As I say, Clydesdale Bank were fantastic through that time with myself. They allowed me to continue my studies, gave me 8 weeks off at a time to go to Julian Valley College to do my ACIBS once I'd completed the Diploma in Financial Services. And once I'd passed my ACIBS, I was able to register at Napier University to do my members, which was done on 16 weeks at a time, block release, and I graduated from that in 2000. One of the things I was thinking about as I was writing the talk was, I used to walk along the road visualising when I passed and when I graduated. I suppose it was the power of positive thinking. I used to always think about, wouldn't it be great when I actually got that members? Wouldn't it be great the way that people look at me? Wouldn't it be great how I can move on in my career? And that's how driven I became by the Chartered Industry Bankers' success. It really did drive me on. I was lucky enough to have some good mentors as I studied. One of them is, I know a big friend of Helen's, a guy called Ian MacArthur. And when I worked in Edinburgh for Clydesdale Bank, Ian really drove me on, and he really encouraged me to continue study, as did a lot of people in Clydesdale Bank. And sometimes we just don't see that in the banks at the moment. We just don't see people having the encouragement which I genuinely think that I had back in the day. What was interesting for me when I did my exams is a lot of the time I was driven by the fear of failure. And as I say, it's very strange now for me to look back at that when I see my mindset now and see how focused and positive I am about life and career. But at the time, because I hadn't done anything so big, it really was the sense of failure that drove me to study, that drove me to sit and work, 8 till 6 during the day, then come back and study till 11 o'clock at night. And ultimately, as I say, I achieved my goal. And one of the proudest moments for me when I got my MCIBS was I received a telephone call from the bank's chief executive office, which was Clydesdale Bank at the time, as I say. And when I picked up the phone, it was an invitation for lunch with the then bank chief executive, Stuart Grimshaw. Now, I was 23 at the time, and I really couldn't understand what he wanted with myself. But what he actually wanted to invite me to lunch to tell me was that out of the 20 or so Clydesdale Bank employees who did the members that year, I had actually topped, or should I say, came in the top 2 of the aggregate scores for the bank. So he wanted to understand a little bit about my own progress, what had driven me, and how this little school leaver, I suppose, had managed to beat all the graduates that year, which the bank had invested so much to. I always remember something he said to me at the time as well, which still makes me chuckle. He kind of leant over to me because there was about 20 of us there that day, and he said, "How does it feel to beat everybody in this room?" And I thought that was quite a funny thing for him to say. But what it did help me do is it built my confidence more than anything, and it made me begin to realise that all these people that I was in awe of, all these people who had educations, all these people who I thought were maybe better than me, for want of a better word, were equal and were on a par with myself. And thereafter I started to look at, well, how can I begin to make this pay? Within the bank, a lot of people knew that I was doing my exams because I was always so driven, and I was studying at lunchtime, and I was making sure that I understood what things were. I was always asking questions, asking people, do you have your bank exams? Why not? If you don't have, and really trying to push them forward as I tried to gauge where I was in the company, for want of a better phrase. Then within a year, I was recruited by Clydesdale Bank to start up a business unit in Falkirk along with 2 other individuals, and that was to centralise the small business credits which the bank had at the time. And that was a real win for myself, because finally all the study and all the hard work that I'd done had started to pay off. And for me, I was able to sit in that exam process and talk about the exams, to talk about how I was educated, how I was professional, and how I was going to put that into practice, everything that I'd learned. And it was actually quite a powerful thing for a young guy at that age, 23, who, as I say, had been studying for only a few years, but managed to achieve everything he wanted to get that job. And I remember them telling me at the time, we know we're taking a punt on you because of your age, but we can see something in you and we believe in you. And again, when your employer tells you that, after they've actually stuck by you and given you the funding for the exams, it begins to really pay dividends in your mind, and you want to work hard for them. So when I was doing my members, as I say, that was the ultimate goal. It was to move on in Clydesdale Bank, and that's what I managed to ultimately do. And within a year of starting up that unit, I'd actually been asked, handpicked, for go back to Edinburgh to become a business banking manager, and that's where I've seen my career since then. I've been a business banking manager now since probably around about 2004. Worked for 3 banks during that time, which Clydesdale Bank, Handelsbanken obviously latterly, but also a small spell with Lloyds TSB in the middle. But the one thing that's really helped me and set me up for that is my Chartered Institute of Bankers examinations. I was lucky enough in 2000 to read a magazine article, which was in our trade paper, as it were, the Chartered Institute of Bankers, where they had actually said, tell us how the Chartered Institute or the Chartered Banker has changed your life. Tell us the impact it's had in your career. So this story, which I've just retold here 20 years later, I actually told to the Chartered Institute 20 years ago, and was successful enough to win the Chartered Banker of the Year, as it was at that time. And again, that was something which was a real feather in my cap. I got a magazine article placed upon me. I was able to sit down and show it to the guys in Clydesdale Bank, who, were very, very proud and, exceptionally proud. And it was a great moment for myself. And I always remember one of the things which I did with that magazine article was I got a copy of it and I gave it to my mum, and I just said, there you go. And that was it. That was a round circle for me. I'd kind of completed my journey of everything which I wanted to set out with the Chartered Institute of Bankers. I suppose there's been a couple of regrets in the way. I suppose one of the things that I wish I had done was picked up on it and finished my MBA. I never actually started that, but we could fast track through the MBA at that time. But work became all consuming, and the job became all consuming by that point. But that's probably the one regret I've got with my Chartered Institute, that I should have went and did the MBA. In 2004, I joined also Lloyds Banking Group. I got an offer. I felt really bad at that point because I got an offer to join Lloyds Banking Group after being a Clydesdale man, and I thought it'd be Clydesdale man and boy. But I took a position to work with the senior team in Lloyds in Edinburgh, and worked on the business side. Worked there for around about 4 years. Had a great time there. Had a lot of involvement with the Chartered Institute at the time as well, and again was involved in helping our graduates come through the programme, working with them. They worked with us for 6 months at a time, and monitoring them and mentoring them through the Chartered Institute programme was really quite an enjoyable process. In around about 2008, and apologies if I'm jumping around with dates here, I was on the way to Glasgow for a meeting, and I got a telephone call, and the telephone call was from a recruitment agent, and he said, I want to talk to you about a potential bank opening up in Edinburgh. And if we take ourselves back to 2008, we were just about to hit a financial crisis. We had no room for a new bank in Edinburgh as far as I was concerned at that point. The market was sewn up by RBS and HBOS. And I remember thinking to myself, why is a recruitment consultant phoning me, first of all, to open a new bank when we're just about to enter into a financial crisis? So he said, can I speak to you and in detail? I don't want to tell you which bank it is, but I would just like to have some time with you. I said no initially to the guy. And it was a kind of sliding doors moment, if anybody's seen that film with Gwyneth Paltrow, because the minute I said it, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's an opportunity that you've let go. So I said, phone me tomorrow to the guy, and he did. He phoned me the next again day and told me about this bank that wanted to come into Scotland. Now, I'd heard of the bank was Handelsbanken, but I knew absolutely nothing about it. And what he basically said to me was, not been following your career as such, but I have heard about you over the last year, and I wanted to see if you would like to open a new bank in Scotland, take it from a standing start, zero customer base, and then put it into what we want to be the best in class. It's a challenge that at that point, given how much I'd grown and developed as an individual, which again, I will always put back to doing my Chartered Institute Bankers exams, was something which I said, how could you not want to be involved in that challenge? The bank, as I say, was Handelsbanken. And for the next 6 years of my life, I then worked almost day and night to get Handelsbanken Edinburgh off the ground, and opened up initially in George Street in Edinburgh. And at its peak, I think that particular branch was making around about £3 million for the bank within 5 years or so before we started to expand in Scotland. And by the time that I'd set off to work in Manchester, where a regional office is for Handelsbanken, we had 8 branches in Scotland. And as Helen said, we've now just about opened our third. We would have had it opened if it wasn't for the if it wasn't for the global pandemic which we've got. But I know that many people won't know who Handelsbanken are. So what I want to do now is, after telling you a little bit about myself, is just to really go through a quick plotted history of Handelsbanken, who we are, because it is genuinely a fascinating story. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what Handelsbanken are in the modern world. So who are Handelsbanken? Handelsbanken were Swedish. And it's funny, when I first opened in Edinburgh in what would have been March 2009, there'd been a bank which had just collapsed, and it was a bank called Landesbanken. And when we opened in Edinburgh, everybody thought that this was just a rejuvenation of Landesbanken. So what we had to really do to express who Handelsbanken were sell the story of Handelsbanken. And one of the things which I did personally was I went back and I researched the history of Handelsbanken, because I thought, this organisation is phenomenal, it's so good, so strong. I need to be in a situation to talk about it, to pull customers away from RBS, to pull customers away from the Bank of Scotland, because at the time these guys had about 34% market share each. And for us coming into the market, you know, we wanted to get the best in class for corporate businesses, but also the best in class for individual banking, which were the two strands of business which the bank did at the time. So for me, the best way to do that was tell people how much I knew about the bank, not ask for business, but show a passion for the bank. And that's really how we grew Edinburgh. And it's funny when I sit back and talk about Edinburgh, and people used to say to me, how did you grow it so quickly? How did you grow it so fast? Myself and another guy that grew it, Ian Shearer at the time, we just went out and told the story, and people wanted to bank with us. So Handelsbanken, as I say, has got a phenomenal story. And the story dates back to 1871, and it's in Sweden, 1871. There's a bank called Stockholm Enskala, and 8 members of the board of that particular bank fall out with the rest of the bank in 1871, and they decide that they're going to form their own bank because they just can't get over issues and problems which they've got with this particular group of people. And in 1871, these 8 people move away, create a new bank, at the time called Stockholm's Handelsbanken, and Handelsbanken effectively means corporate bank is its translation. So they effectively opened Stockholm's corporate bank in 1871, and in 1871 the King of Sweden actually gives them a charter to trade as a bank. These 8 people managed to raise, don't know how they did it, but they managed to raise 1 million SEK, which in our money at the current time is probably around about £100,000. And they managed to go and open a bank. And what they wanted to do with this bank was to have true banking objectives. They only wanted to do true banking activities, which were deposits and loans. They didn't want to do anything else. And that's really how the bank actually started. They started with 12 employees, and we now have 12,500 employees. And the first bank opened in Stockholm in 1876, some 5 years later, should I say. But what's truly impressive is the bank had already grown in such strength and such stature within 2 years that in 1873 it was the first company ever listed on the Swedish Stock Exchange. And the Swedish Stock Exchange was actually formed to allow Handelsbanken to go onto it to raise some money. So the bank, even going back to that time, has always been very, very strong. Within 10 years of opening, it faced its first financial crisis. A lot of the banks, believe it or not, and back in that time as industrial revolution came through, had invested in railway bond stock. And within 10 years, Handelsbanken was facing a crisis. And the fact that this railway bond stock, no one knew if it was going to pay out. It was really uncertain. And the banks in Sweden and in Stockholm particularly nearly all collapsed. But with the exception of Handelsbanken, which by 1878, some 7 years after its existence, was so successful that it was the only bank back then that didn't need financial assistance from the Swedish government. So it was quite a phenomenal story even back then. The bank in between that period of the late 1800s to say the early 1900s or so traded well. It always did very strong business, and it grew through mergers and acquisitions, whereas other banks as well looked down to the south of Sweden. The bank looked to the north, where forest ranger was booming, and actually invested a lot in forestry, did a lot of acquisitions of banks, regional banks, smaller banks over there, to the point that it had probably somewhere around about 70 odd branches by 1919. And when it merged with another bank in 1919, it then became Svenska Handelsbanken, as we know at the current time. Svenska Handelsbanken AB Public, to get its full name. So the bank's history is very, very rich. The bank continued to trade really well, and right through the 1920s, it traded strongly. It traded well as they had the financial crisis around the world. The Wall Street crash happened in 1929, but Handelsbanken managed to continue to grow and to grow and to grow. During the financial crisis of the 1920s and 1930s, however, sometimes it did run out of money, and it was undercapitalised. And certainly in 1922, the bank had an undercapitalised position, which nearly put it under, but thankfully it managed to grow its books to the point where it managed to survive. In 1930s, when we had the Wall Street crash, the bank actually effectively took over control of 7 of its largest companies, which were on its books to protect the debt, and put all these companies into a trading business called Industry of Arden, which up until 1945 the bank actually owned, and it was finally listed on the stock exchange in 1945, Industry of Arden. But out of these 7 companies which the bank actually took under its ownership and control, the bank actually had Ericsson, the phone company which we know now, under its ownership from, I think it was around about 1935 to 1945 or so. So a very, very interesting history there which the bank have got. It was a corporate bank, and until around 1955, the bank traded purely as a corporate entity. In 1955, it took on a company called SIG AB, which was a mortgage company, and it allowed it to actually go on to the mortgage market and become almost like a high street retailer, as it were, in Sweden. And by 1965, it had 157 branches across the whole of Sweden. It's a very, very interesting time, for banking in Sweden at that point, because we were coming out of the post-war era. The banks in Sweden had capitalisation issues because they had limitations on how they could trade set by the Swedish government. And the Swedish government really heavily sensitised and heavily regulated the industry in Sweden from the post-war period. Handelsbanken, if we skip a couple of generations, as it were, has always traded really, really well. and it's always traded well in its decentralisation model, which came in around about the 1960s. But again, as we hark back to the history of it, in 1969, the bank nearly went under because it was involved in a big scandal where the bank actually breached a number of regulations on currency, and it bought a well-known travel company. And at that point, the bank got itself in a bit of a sticky wicket, which meant that the whole of the board actually resigned from Handelsbanken in 1969. And at that time, we thought to ourselves, right, how do we continue this bank on? We're a great bank, we've got great ethos, we've got great stability, but we've had an issue with the management. And what we did at that time was we looked up to the north of Sweden, and there was a guy who kind of became a folk hero in Handelsbanken. And if you talk to a Handelsbanker now and mention this guy's name, you'll probably just get a big smile on your face. It was a guy called Jan Wallander. He was recruited from a bank in one of the northern provincial banks called Sundsvall Banken, which is just a small bank. I believe it only had about 8 branches. But Wallander had actually taken that particular bank and decentralised it. And Handelsbanken looked towards that small bank and said to Wallander, is this something that you can do on a national scale? Because at that point, as we say, Handelsbanken was all over the Swedish country. And what we wanted to do was bring in his ideas, his principles. And Wallander actually turned around the bank. I went over to Sweden, and I was lucky enough to go to the bank's museum, which we have in our head office in Sweden, in Stockholm. And what we've got in there is a blue folder, a blue manila folder. There's a booklet within it, which is now known as Our Way. And what it is, it's Jan Wallander's blueprint for how Handelsbanken can be a better bank. And when I was over there, I was talking to one of the historians over there, and she told me that Wallander went away to a cabin one weekend and he wrote Our Way. And whether or not that's true or not, I genuinely don't know. But I love the story of the fact that our chief executive at the time went away and actually thought, how can I change this bank? How can I save it? And what he actually did was come back and put his principles in place. And his principles were all set upon a business writer who had studied. I believe Wallander had went to Harvard and studied a business writer called Thompson, who had advocated decentralization. And Wallander started to put his principles in place in his previous bank, and then put his principles in place in Handelsbanken. And what he did really was he said, how can, in essence, a bank which is based in Sweden, in Stockholm, should I say, make decisions for somewhere which is 300-400 miles away? We don't know that customer base. We don't know what drives them. We don't know what their sector's like. So what he did was he actually came in and he closed a number of head office functions. He created 8 regional banks across the whole of Sweden for Handelsbanken. Each of those banks had around about, at the time, 70 different branches within the 8 regional banks. And he granted each of the regional banks their own independence and allowed them to make their own decisions, choose the types of customers which they would like, choose the pricing that they would like to bring for their customers. He decentralised many tasks which were previously done in head office. And one of the most interesting things was he scrapped budgeting. Wallander was a big one on looking at actual profit outcome of a business rather than actually looking at forecasts. And his view was, how can I, Jan Wallander, sit here in Stockholm and say what's going to happen in 18 months' time, 12 months' time? I just can't. So he actually scrapped budgets, saying that they were unnecessary. He called them an unnecessary evil, I believe, and said that they were outright dangerous. So since 1971, the bank haven't budgeted. It's something which we just don't do. The new organisation was a focus on profitability rather than volume, doing the right things for the customer, and sometimes choosing to do the right thing for the customer, even if it wasn't the right thing for the bank. All of that driven by relationship. And Wallander wanted the regional banks to be so close to their customer that they would be ingrained within the business, that they would actually be proud to bank with Handelsbanken, and that all the decisions would be made locally. And that's still the case now. 99% of all decisions, credit decisions in Handelsbanken, are made locally. It is quite a phenomenal story. So what did Valander do to kind of set us up? He actually just gave us two goals. The two goals he gave Handelsbanken were that we must be more profitable than our peer group, and that we must control our costs, and we must bring no costs in, which would place increased costs, as it were, on the customers. And that's still the measure of Handelsbanken at the moment. You know, we do not have any budgets in any of our branches. We don't set any targets. We don't do any targeted marketing campaigns. We grow by word of mouth. We grow by referral. We grow by relationship. All the principles that Jan Valander put back in place in the 1970s still exist to this day. One of the things which is really special about Handelsbanken as well is the culture. And the culture was driven by Valander stating, when we create this bank, we can only do it if we've got the best employees. So our employees must be better than our competitors' employees. Our employees, to achieve this, must be able to outperform the other peers which we've got in the rest of the industry. And as such, he made the decision in 1973 to reward the employees of Handelsbanken. So what now happens is every quarter which the bank are more successful in these measures, which I've outlined, than their peer group bank, Handelsbanken will actually make an allocation of capital towards each of the individuals. And it's the same allocation of capital as it would be for the office junior, for want of a better word, right up to the chief executive. And we each get awarded the same amount. And the first allocation in 1973 was 10 million SEK, which is roughly about £1 million. And that was allocated equally and distributed equally to the staff. It sounds like a bonus structure. It's not. One of the things which Valander did was he said bonuses drive the wrong behaviours. I want long-term in Handelsbanken. I want people to ensure that we're making the right decisions for the right people at the right times. I don't want to do transactional business. I want to do relationship banking. So one of the things which Valander did was scrap bonus payments in 1973. Bank have never paid a bonus since. What we do is we allocate capital to Octagonen, and when you leave, when you retire, you actually get the Octagonen allocation, which has been set aside for yourself. In Sweden, you get it at, say, 65. The UK, we get it now at 55. But it's all driven to make the behaviours correct. We don't want any short-term deals. We don't want anything which is going to be here today, gone tomorrow. And you may have heard Handelsbanken saying things that if you ever came across us, we don't do transactional business. We don't do business, say, property development, because it's short-term, it's transaction. What we want is pure relationship banking. Handelsbanken now is actually about 10% owned by the staff. Very similar, I suppose, in the UK to John Lewis, which is a partnership, or was a partnership. Handelsbanken, we own about 10% of it. It's very, very strong, because what we've now got is the staff are informed. We can make long-term decisions, and we're a major influencer in the future and history of Handelsbanken. And I think there's no other bank in the world that I can think of that has so much empowerment to its staff than Handelsbanken. As I say, the Second World War really put tight controls on the Swedish financial market, and they deregulated the financial market in around about 1985 in Sweden. And when they did that, it allowed Handelsbanken to go into different countries. We grew very, very quickly, and in the 1980s, after the deregulation of the Swedish market, we actually doubled our volumes in the 1980s, and by the end of the 1990s, we had 17% market share in Sweden. At that point, the bank decided to expand. We opened up offices in New York, Singapore, London. By the early 1994, I think it was, we had 4 branches in the UK, and we also had operations in Norway, Finland, Denmark, and latterly we've opened up in the Netherlands. The UK aspect of it really came to the fore between the years 2000 and 2010. And between those years, at one point, you probably heard Handelsbanken's name everywhere as a banker. We were opening on average a new branch 1 every 8 business days for a small period. The growth was carefully selected, and a branch for Handelsbanken is very different to a branch of another bank. A branch of Handelsbanken, we don't have cash, we don't have counter services. We have a corporate manager, we have a branch manager, we have an individual banking manager, and a support system underneath us. And then the wider support is still held within the regional banking centres which we've got. So the bank, as I say, grew and grew and grew. And into the 2021, we've now got around about 207 branches officially in the UK. The bank is a phenomenal animal in the UK. We were lucky enough to go and become a PLC in 2018. The bank decided that the UK book was something which was growing very well, very steadily, and we decided to, for the regulation authorities, more to fall into alignment with the PRA and FCA, to create our own PLC. And we achieved that and came out of that in 2018. So the bank in the UK now stands on its own. We're still supported by the government, sorry, not by the government, by the Swedish parent company. But we're doing very, very well in the UK. What do we look like in the UK? The bank offers 2 main services really in the UK. I've touched upon them. It's corporate banking and it's individual banking. We do mortgages, we do asset finance, we do international trade finance. We've got a long, long track record. What makes a bank amazing to work for, and one thing which we're really proud of, we're actually one of the world's safest banks. Global Finance rank the banks every year, and we've been in the top 10 for a number of years. And currently in 2020, we're actually the joint top scoring commercial bank in the world in terms of being classed as the world's safest bank. EPSI, who everybody will all know them, will all come across them. For the 12th year in a row now, Handelsbanken have actually been top of the customer satisfaction surveys for the EPSI scores. And how we do that is really, we never pressurise customers. We always listen to our customers. We've got great relationships with them. We always listen to what they say. But most of all, our staff have all got the culture of Handelsbanken ingrained in them. To join Handelsbanken can sometimes be quite a long process. We identify who we want, and then we would actually go out and we'd maybe say, target that person, invite them in for a coffee, tell them a little bit about Handelsbanken. Then we'll do something which is quite unique. We'll let them go to a number of branches, maybe 2, 3 branches, and say to them, ask as many questions as you want, open book, just actually go in, ask to see credits, ask to see how it's written, ask to see how we assess a rating for a customer. Just go in and ask as many questions as you want. All the way through, we're interviewing them. And all the way through, we're assessing the potential for them to be Handelsbankers, because we want them to join in and appreciate the culture. And if someone comes in and says to us, I'll do 20 million for you in the first year, that's not Handelsbanker for us. If someone comes in and says to us, we get the culture, we understand the culture, and we think that we can make a difference to this organisation, and we think that we can form good relationships. We've got strong relationships existing with outside counterparties such as accountants, listers. That's what a Handelsbanker would be. So it's very much cultural driven. And now in the UK, interestingly, when we speak to people who work in Sweden, they believe that the Handelsbanken branches in the UK live the culture more than they do in Sweden, because in Sweden they've become almost a high street bank where you would see everywhere at the current time. So for the guys coming over to the UK and seeing Handelsbanken here, they think, yeah, you guys are living the Handelsbanken as it's how it's meant to be. And again, that's quite proud. And one of the things we always do is we make sure that people understand what our way is. In the book that Valander wrote back in 1970, every chief executive that comes in updates that, and we get a signed copy when we come into the bank, and we read it and we all say, yeah, I've signed it and I've read it and I've understood it. And again, it's quite a powerful thing. So the bank is really driven by culture. But I think when I came into Handelsbanken, I got to live that dream, and I was in quite a unique position because I got to start up the Edinburgh branch. And to show you just how strong that Handelsbanken culture is, when I came into Edinburgh, I set myself up with Ian Shearer, who was the branch manager at the time, and we found a small office in Abbey Business Centre in Princes Street. And we looked at each other in March 2009 and said, God, we've got to open a bank now. We had no idea what to do. We had just the two of us, but we had all the support of the Handelsbanken back staff who were based down in Manchester at the time. We could not have got more support. Any question we asked, the bank actually helped us with. Any lending, any questions which we had, the bank would say, phone this branch or speak to that branch. And every branch that we spoke to would invite us down and we'd go and visit them. We'd take ideas from them and we'd create them and put them into our own Edinburgh culture. And you just don't get that opportunity in banking. We were able to pick our own office, our own furniture, our own table, our own carpets. It sounds crazy in the modern banking world, but that's what we got to do. We got to build a bank from zero upwards. And as I say, we took it from zero to a very, very profitable organisation by the time that I'd left to come down to Manchester. So working in Handelsbanken, it's different. It's a bank that doesn't advertise. We don't put any targets on our staff. We grow by recommendation and word of mouth. We target, select our customers and our staff, which is quite unusual. We know and understand all our customers. Each branch themselves is a local business. We have our own profit and loss account, which we live and die by. I can tell you to the penny how much one of my customers paid me yesterday, which I've never been able to do before in a previous bank, but we've got access to that level of information. As I say, we make all the local decisions within Handelsbanken, and as I say, 99% of the credits are signed off within our own region or within branch, which allows us to do quite swift decisions for our customers. The bank has the highest rating of any bank in the UK at the current time. We've got a AA rating on Fitch, which is the strongest of any bank currently trading in the UK. And as I say, our EPSI results speak for itself. So for me, I'm quite proud to work for Handelsbanken, as you can probably tell. I maybe went that little bit further and learned the culture and learned the history a little bit more than some of my colleagues. But the bank has the highest rating of this bank and really sell the culture and maintain that culture within the UK. It is a bank which the staff are exceptionally proud to work for. The one thing, though, which I've probably missed through going through all of that is the one thing which we genuinely truly believe. We've got a big saying in Handelsbanken, at the heart of everything we do is the customer. And the customer is genuinely at the heart of what we do. We've got a diagram called the wheel. It's all about support, from relationship management support to back-end support, but at the heart of it is the customer. And we appreciate that we genuinely are nothing without the customer there for Handelsbanken. And we genuinely believe we're only as good as our last interaction with the customer as well. We do run a low-cost basis, and that, again, at times can be a challenge. Sometimes our systems aren't as good as they could be to the customers, but the relationship with which we've got allows us to really get over small hurdles like that. So for me, being a Handelsbanker, it sounds kind of corny. It's a responsibility. We're keeping up a culture. We're keeping up a responsibility. And for me, where I learned that responsibility and culture was by doing my exams. And again, some people will be able to now understand exactly where I'm coming from. It allowed me, by doing my bank exams, to become a professional, to become confident, to become comfortable in my own skin, I suppose, and become a better banker. So that's kind of my plotted history of Handelsbanken. I hope it was interesting. I know I probably rabbited a little too fast, but I really hope that you enjoyed the story of Handelsbanken, and I'm happy to take any questions as well on the bank and the structure.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Chris. That was really interesting listening. And we've got a couple of questions that have came through, so I'll just start off if that's okay. So one's came from Gregor Finlay, who actually was in our Edinburgh Lothians and Fife District Centre of the Institute. And you spoke about, obviously, the difference between what happens now in Sweden with the growth of the bank. But do you feel in the UK that Handelsbanken could continue to offer your current level of service? Should your client base start to grow significantly over the next few years, this maybe the same way as it has back in Sweden?
Yeah, the bank at the current time is probably going through a little bit of a stall at the moment in the UK, and that's by design. As I say, between specifically 2004 to 2012, we opened up so many different branches, and some of the branches which we opened up were maybe in the wrong locations. So for the very first time in Handelsbanken's history, we've actually closed a couple of branches recently. And the rationale behind that was we didn't feel that we could actually service the customers well enough, or that the locations were wrong, or that we could service them from a better location. So what you will see in the UK over the next 18 months is probably just Handelsbanken just slowing down. We probably won't see many banks opening up, or regional banks, branches opening up in Scotland. And I'm aware that the Edinburgh East branch, which Craig Ramsey is about to open, will be probably the last one that we'll see up in Scotland for a little while. But Craig and his team have got a fantastic office there. They've got a fantastic opportunity there to really grow and develop there. How we monitor and service our customers, if we think a branch actually grows too much and we can't service our customers, what we do is we don't continue to grow that branch. We'll open another branch. And the reason that Craig, Andy and Henderson opened branches in Edinburgh after the success of what we did in the first branch was because the branches were getting far too big. So we don't recruit to grow. We recruit in the Handelsbanken methodology. We recruit when we need to. So, when Ian opened up West End, it was because really we got too big in George Street. Now that Craig's opening, I'm sure that I've been away for a while, so I don't know the opportunity behind it, but it's probably something similar. So for us, we grow generically and we grow when there's a need to. So I do slow down branches. We'll certainly not see the volume of branches we opened before ever happening again. But it was right to grow at that pace in that time because we had a real opportunity. We were coming out of the financial crisis. People weren't offering services, and what we were offering was not necessarily unique, but other banks weren't offering it. What we do is it's not unique what we do, but what we do is we do it well. And one of the things which we've got to do is we've got to be the best. And we're all driven to be the best and to get the best customers. People say Handelsbanken cheekily cherry pick their customers. We do, and we don't make any excuse about it. We will take the best customers that we can, because we look at customers in two ways. Can we have strong repayment capacity from them? And if the debt goes wrong, or if there's an ability for it to go wrong, could we see them having financial powers of resistance? And that's the way that we actually monitor and evaluate our customers. We're always looking at their cash flow, and we're always looking at what's behind them. So yeah, a bit of a rambling answer, but we'll certainly not grow as fast as we have. Yeah, we may grow, but it'll be very much controlled.
Well, that was really interesting. Thanks for that, Chris. And actually, I've just seen as well that we did get a comment through from Chris Ramsey, who's on as well, who's the new branch manager. So good to see you on, Chris. He's just saying he's endorses the positive message that you've mentioned there. So just another question is actually just came from Helen as well. So given that you're such a traditional bank, how have you guys coped with the reduced face-to-face contact as a result of the pandemic? Obviously something that we're all experiencing at the time being. Just intrigued to know how that's affected you guys.
It's a fantastic question because it's, well, again, using big Craig Ramsey as an example, Craig's branch is, sitting there, it's ready to go and it's empty. There's some fantastic pictures of it in LinkedIn, but that terrace looks ridiculous, Craig. But there's some pictures there and the branch just hasn't welcomed any staff yet. That's a shame for us to see. In Lancaster, where I'm based now, I think over the course of the year, I've seen 2 customers. And it is kind of heartbreaking, that you've not been so involved with them. But what we did when coronavirus first came to the fore, I think it was March the 13th, I think it was, we made the decision that we'd split our team last year. And what we did was I went and started working from home initially on that week in March. And I phoned every single one of my customers and I just said to them, we're here for you. Whatever you need, just pick up the phone, whether it's a CBILS. We don't know if we're going to be able to do them as yet, but if we can, we'll help you. If we need to do some short-term finance to get you through, if we need to introduce you to someone, even if it's another bank, if we can help you, we'll do it. We made the difference, and we actually phoned every single one of our customers. Over the course of the last year, I've probably done that every 2 to 3 weeks, phoned all my customers and just made sure that they were okay, made sure that they didn't need anything from us. We offered them capital repayment holidays on term loan financing. We, in some instances, actually asked the customers if they wanted it. In some instances, told them that we would happily give them it, even if they didn't ask for it. So we tried to look out for them that way. But the biggest thing is not being able to speak to them and be in touch with them, and see them on a daily basis. We've used Zoom, we've used Teams, we've used Skype, and we're now getting to the point where, I can see that we might not go back to traditional banking. We have discussed in Handelsbanken, is this the new norm now? Can we actually undertake business like this? And what we're actually seeing is in Sweden, I think they're actually getting to the point now where they're actually closing a number of branches in Sweden, and it was released in the press last year that the bank are closing 200 branches in Sweden because the cash system's dropping away in Sweden, and it's one of the countries which don't use cash. In Europe, I think it's actually the top country in Europe in terms of non-cash usage. So the branch numbers are falling away. So I don't think that the branch numbers will fall away in the UK for that reason, but I do think that we'll have other ways and means of speaking to customers. And now it's very, very usual for me to sit and Skype a customer, which is weird when I'm sitting doing it in my office upstairs, but it's the norm. And I think all the banks are embracing the technology.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. So the question and answer has been a little bit like waiting for a bus. They've all came at once, but in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll kind of generalise together for a couple of questions we've had just around about the way that you've ended that answer there, just about technology. And so obviously quite interesting regarding the way that you guys are decentralised and have your regional balance books, etc. But how do you guys find that from a performance side of things when we're living in a digital age where you have so many metrics and analytics available to you? And also most of those kind of customer-facing kind of technological advances, do you feel you guys properly utilise that? And if you do, how is it you make the most of that, given the kind of the decentralisation that happens?
Okay, so firstly, the technology in Handelsbanken is something which we need to invest in, and we've made no bones about that. Our technology offering, I think with us, we're very safe. And if someone said describe Handelsbanken in 2 words, it is very safe. And I think what we've always done with technology is we've always bought programs which have been in existence. So we maybe have bought, say, and again, I'm just making up the dates, in Microsoft 2004, we would have bought Microsoft 2001, because everybody would have been through all the hardships with it and been through all the technological issues with it. So we go for a very, very safe point all the time. So because of that, maybe we're behind the curve in terms of our IT section. But what we've just done over recent months is we've announced that we'll actually be slightly restructuring the UK. And one of the changes to that is we've actually brought in a program of digitalization. And we've got a woman called Suzanne Minifee, who was one of our regional managers, will be leading the digital program for Handelsbanken in the UK. We'll be investing heavily in it, and we'll be bringing ourselves up to 2021 standards. We've got an app at the moment on iPhone, Android. A lot of our customers use that. So technology, we have probably been a little bit slower of the other banks in embracing it, but we still use it. And we're getting to the point now where more and more of our customers are using it. But to be fair, we're trying to push them that way to use it, but still speak to us in the actual branches. What the first part of the question was again, if you could just refresh my memory.
I was mentioned just around about kind of things about like performance. Somebody said you guys don't have targets. Do you have the same sort of kind of technological review of performance as other banks, or do you guys, given the way you operate, tend to be a little more independent?
We're all independent. What you don't see, and it sounds weird to the outsiders, but what you don't see within Handelsbanken is any numbers and specific figures within our business plans. Every year we will sit down and say, my team in Lancaster, we got together over Zoom this year, which was different, and we actually created a branch business plan. Who do we want? What type of customers do we want? What do we think we can achieve this year realistically, given the pandemic? What do we think we want to see as our cost income ratio? Because that is a massive driver for Handelsbanken. And again, sorry to hark back to Craig Ramsey, but one of the big things which Craig will be targeted with in that new Edinburgh branch is growing his business, obviously growing the reputation, but doing it under a controlled basis and bringing the cost income ratio down to as low as possible, as quickly as possible, because it's one of the key matrices which we have in Handelsbanken. So with the level of data which we've got available to us every day, we can see how much a customer earns, we can see how much the customer makes us from an interest point of view, service charge point of view. So we know exactly where we've been and that we know where we want to go. But what we don't do is we don't put in false targets to drag behaviours. Because harping back to Jan Wallander, one of the examples which was given to me when I was in Sweden, we do not want a bank that scrambles around on the last business day of the quarter, putting through crappy bits of business, for want of a better phrase, just because to meet a target. You know, that's not what Handelsbanken's about. So each of us that join the bank are very driven. We understand what's required of us. The bank pay Handelsbanken staff, and it's written actually in a publication which I just read today, which I'd never seen before. We pay our staff well because we know they're professionals. And I suppose that comes back in the way that we all handle something like having no targets. You know, when we don't have any targets, what drives you? It's your own professionalism to grow the business, to drive the business. So not having any budgets, it's actually quite liberating. And we really, really embrace it. And now if someone says to us in Handelsbanken, can we put a target in? We say no. We say we don't want a target in. But is it successful? It is, because we pick the right types of customers. And one of the things which you'll see if you ever look at Handelsbanken annual accounts is our actual loan losses are negligible. And through the financial crisis, when all of the banks were writing off and making huge provisions, our loan losses were about 0.25%. It was crazy. But that's all about customer selection. And we always target and pick the right customers. So not having budgets doesn't affect us. We're professional. We know what we've got to do, and we all achieve it together as a team. And it's very much a collective.
Fantastic. Thanks for that detailed answer on that, Chris. So apologies to other questions that we've had through that we've not had time for, folks. We did get a couple through there, but we have ran over it slightly. So what we'll do is I'll hand back to yourself, Helen. No, don't worry, Chris. It's been really interesting listening to you. Fantastic. Thanks an awful lot for that. So Helen, back to you.
Thanks very much, Rory, for doing that Q&A session and managing to bag someone in the one question as well. That's great. Thanks very much, Chris, for that very insightful conversation. A couple of things a bit spooky at the beginning. I decided when I was a child I wanted to go and join a bank because I liked counting money. And then I wrote to all the banks, and strangely enough, Clydesdale was the first one that responded to me as well. And I hate to say this, but I was the last manager at Bowness branch when we closed it down. So apologies.
Really? Oh,
yes.
There we go.
Anyway, thank you very much for that, Chris. And thank you very much, Heather, for facilitating once again and for promoting our event. And thanks very much for everybody joining us tonight. And hope to catch you all again soon. We don't have anything immediately planned, but keep an eye out on newsletters and the website for future events. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.